You're standing in a Honda showroom, keys to three completely different machines within reach, and you can only choose one. Maybe you dream of interstate mornings and continental crossings. Maybe you'd rather claw through mud and river crossings 1,000 miles from pavement. Or maybe you just want a bike that won't scare you on day one. The Gold Wing, the Africa Twin, and the Rebel all wear the same wing badge, yet they couldn't be more different machines. Here's how to tell which one is actually built for the way you ride. The Gold Wing, the long-distance luxury tourer. The Gold Wing has been Honda's flagship touring motorcycle for decades, and the current GL 1800 generation is built around a 1,833 cubic centimeter horizontally opposed six-cylinder engine, an unusual and expensive configuration that delivers a smoothness few other motorcycles can match. That flat six sits low in the chassis, which helps keep the bike's substantial weight, generally in the neighborhood of 800 pounds depending on trim, feeling more manageable than the spec sheet suggests once you're rolling. Riders can choose a traditional 6-speed manual or Honda's automatic DCT dual-clutch transmission, and on higher trims, a walking speed reverse assist that takes the fear out of backing out of a sloped driveway with a passenger and full luggage aboard. What really defines the Gold Wing, though, is everything wrapped around that engine. Full fairing wind protection, heated seats and grips, a touchscreen infotainment system with Apple CarPlay, and on the tour trim, real saddlebags and a top case that swallow enough gear for a two-up trip that lasts weeks rather than days. Some model years have offered an available airbag system as well, a feature almost unheard of anywhere else in motorcycling. This is a bike engineered for the rider who measures trips in thousands of miles, not tank ranges, and who values arriving relaxed over arriving quickly. That comfort and technology come at a cost. The Gold Wing typically carries the highest price tag of the three, generally starting in the mid-$20,000 range and climbing well beyond that on fully loaded tour and airbag trims. Maintenance is also more involved than a simpler bike, since the flat six and its supporting electronics call for specialized dealer service more often than not. For the rider who wants a motorcycle that behaves like a touring car on two wheels, though, few machines in Honda's lineup, or anyone else's, come close. Fuel range tends to be a genuine strength for the Gold Wing despite its size, since the flat six is tuned more for relaxed, efficient cruising than outright power, and a tank typically stretches well past 200 miles of highway riding before you need to think about a fuel stop. Combined with cruise control, adjustable rider modes on many trims, and a suspension that can be tuned electronically for load and road surface, the Gold Wing is engineered so that the miles simply disappear behind you. Riders who've owned one for years often describe the sensation less like riding a motorcycle and more like piloting a very quiet, very capable machine that happens to lean into corners. The Africa Twin, the all-terrain adventure machine. The Africa Twin, badged as the CRF 1100L, traces its name back to Honda's Dakar rally winning machines of the 1980s, and the modern version still leans hard into that heritage. Power comes from a 1,084 cubic centimeter parallel twin, a far lighter and more compact unit than the Gold Wing six-cylinder, and one that's tuned for the low-end torque and rideability that off-road terrain demands, rather than outright top speed. Riders can choose between a standard model and the larger adventure sports variant, the latter adding a bigger fuel tank, more suspension travel, and additional wind protection for riders planning genuinely long, remote trips. Where the Gold Wing prioritizes comfort above nearly everything else, the Africa Twin is built around capability on terrain a touring bike would never survive. Long travel suspension, switchable rider aids, tubeless spoked wheels on many trims, and a narrower, more upright seating position all point toward gravel roads, forest trails, and the kind of unpaved routes that make up genuine adventure riding. Honda also offers the DCT automatic transmission here, which has become popular with adventure riders who want one less thing to manage while navigating technical terrain standing on the pegs. Weight typically lands in the 500-pound range depending on trim and fuel load, dramatically lighter than the Gold Wing and considerably easier to pick up if it goes down on a rocky trail, something that eventually happens to nearly every adventure rider. Pricing sits well below the Gold Wing, generally starting in the mid-teens and climbing from there with the larger adventure sports version and additional equipment. For the rider who wants one motorcycle capable of a highway commute, Monday through Friday, and a genuine off-road expedition on the weekend, the Africa Twin occupies a lane the other two bikes simply don't compete in. One of the Africa Twin's biggest strengths is how honestly it straddles two very different riding worlds. Switchable ABS on the rear wheel, multiple selectable ride modes, and a slim, narrow chassis all make technical off-road sections genuinely manageable rather than intimidating, while the same bike settles into a stable, wind-resistant highway cruiser once you're back on tarmac. Fuel range typically runs shorter than the Goldwing, generally in the 200 to 250 mile range on the standard tank, though the Adventure Sports variant's larger tank pushes that figure meaningfully further, an important consideration for riders planning genuinely remote routes where fuel stops aren't guaranteed. The Rebel, the approachable cruiser. The Rebel line sits at the opposite end of Honda's lineup from the Goldwing, and that's precisely the point. Available as the Rebel 300 with a 286 cubic centimeter single-cylinder engine, or the Rebel 500 with a 471 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled parallel twin. These bikes are built around low weight, low seat height, and a forgiving power delivery that doesn't punish a rider for a clumsy clutch hand. Seat height on most Rebel trims sits in the 27-inch range, low enough that riders who struggle to flat-foot larger bikes often find the Rebel the first motorcycle they feel genuinely confident on. The styling leans into classic cruiser cues, a low blacked-out silhouette, a teardrop tank, and minimal bodywork, but underneath that look is a genuinely modern, easy-to-live-with motorcycle. Fuel injection, liquid cooling on both displacement options, and a light overall curb weight, generally under 420 pounds, even on the larger Rebel 500, make it an easy bike to maneuver at parking lot speeds, something new riders often find more intimidating than the actual riding itself. Price is where the Rebel separates itself most clearly from the other two. It typically starts several times cheaper than either the Goldwing or the Africa Twin, often in the mid-$4,000 to mid-$6,000 range, depending on trim and ABS availability. Maintenance costs follow the same pattern, since a simple air-cooled single or a straightforward liquid-cooled twin without the electronic complexity of the other two bikes generally costs less to service and insure. For a new rider, a commuter, or anyone who wants a light, honest, uncomplicated motorcycle, the Rebel remains one of the most sensible entry points in Honda's entire catalog. The riding experience on a Rebel is deliberately uncomplicated. Throttle response is smooth and predictable. The clutch pull is light enough that a full day of stop-and-go city riding doesn't leave your left hand aching. And the low center of gravity makes tight U-turns and parking lot maneuvers far less nerve-wracking than they'd be on a heavier bike. Many riding schools and new rider courses lean on Rebels for exactly this reason, since a motorcycle that doesn't punish small mistakes tends to build confidence faster than one that does. Engine and performance compared. Lined up side by side, these three engines almost don't feel like they belong to the same manufacturer. The Goldwing's Flat 6 trades outright excitement for turbine-like smoothness and effortless highway cruising, the kind of engine you forget is even running until you glance at the tachometer. The Africa Twin's parallel twin sits in the middle, punchy low-end torque suited to trail riding and confident overtakes, without the outright refinement of the six-cylinder or the featherweight simplicity of the Rebel's smaller engines. The Rebel, depending on which displacement you choose, is the most approachable of the three by a wide margin. The 300 is genuinely gentle, ideal for a rider still building confidence, while the 500 adds enough mid-range pull to keep up comfortably with highway traffic without becoming intimidating. None of the three engines is objectively better than the others. They're simply tuned for entirely different jobs, which is really the whole point of this comparison. Sound and character matter here too, in ways a spec sheet can't fully capture. The Goldwing's Flat 6 produces a distinctive, almost turbine-like hum that many riders find genuinely addictive on a long straightaway, a sound unlike anything else Honda builds. The Africa Twin's parallel twin has a punchier, more mechanical note that suits its adventure bike personality, while the Rebel's smaller singles and twins are the quietest and most understated of the three, fitting for a bike built around approachability rather than drama. Comfort, ergonomics, and everyday livability. Comfort is where the gap between these three bikes becomes most obvious on a real ride. The Goldwing's full fairing, adjustable windscreen, and plush seating are designed for hours in the saddle without fatigue, and passenger accommodations rival what you'd find on a small car in terms of thought and equipment. The Africa Twin trades some of that plushness for a more upright, versatile riding position that works equally well standing on the pegs over rough terrain or seated on a long paved stretch, though wind protection and passenger comfort take a step back from the Goldwing, especially on the standard non-adventure sports version. The Rebel is the most stripped down of the three, and for many riders that's exactly the appeal. There's little wind protection, and the seat is not built for multi-hour stretches, but the low, relaxed riding position and light handling make it an easy, unintimidating bike for city streets and shorter rides. Storage is minimal across the board on the Rebel, generally just what you can strap on compared to the built-in luggage of the Goldwing and the accessory-friendly nature of the Africa Twin. Passenger accommodation follows the same pattern. The Goldwing's rear seat is padded, positioned, and backed with the same care as the rider's, and it's genuinely common to see couples put thousands of miles on one together over a single vacation. The Africa Twin can carry a passenger reasonably well too, though the seat and pegs are noticeably firmer and less generous than the Goldwing's, better suited to shorter stints than all-day touring. The Rebel technically seats two, but its passenger accommodations are the most basic of the three, adequate for a quick ride across town rather than a long trip, which is worth knowing if two-up riding is a priority for you. Price, ownership costs, and maintenance. Cost of ownership follows a fairly predictable curve across these three bikes. The Goldwing sits at the top both in initial purchase price and in ongoing maintenance, since its six-cylinder engine and extensive electronics generally call for more specialized and typically pricier dealer service. The Africa Twin lands in the middle on both counts, a genuinely premium motorcycle but one built with simpler, more accessible mechanicals than the Goldwing, and with a strong reputation for durability when properly maintained. The Rebel is by far the least expensive to buy, insure, and maintain of the three. Its smaller, simpler engines mean routine service is generally quicker and cheaper, and the bike's lighter, overall complexity translates into lower typical repair costs over time. For a rider on a tighter budget, or simply someone who doesn't want a motorcycle that demands specialized attention, the Rebel's low running costs are as much a selling point as its approachable ergonomics. Insurance costs generally track alongside purchase price and engine displacement across all three bikes, meaning the Goldwing typically carries the highest premiums. The Africa Twin sits in the middle, and the Rebel is usually the cheapest of the three to insure, an important factor for newer riders in particular, since insurers often weigh rider experience heavily on higher displacement machines. Financing terms can also vary meaningfully between a bike in the mid-$4,000 range and one well into the mid-$20,000s, so it's worth running the full numbers: purchase price, insurance, expected maintenance, and financing before deciding which of these three actually fits your budget rather than just your riding dreams. Technology and rider aids compared. Technology is another area where these three bikes diverge sharply. The Goldwing carries the most sophisticated electronics package of the three by a wide margin, with a full-color touchscreen, smartphone integration, an advanced audio system, and on many trims, electronically adjustable suspension that reads the road and adjusts damping in real time. Some Goldwing model years have also offered radar-linked adaptive cruise control, a feature that's still rare across motorcycling as a whole and puts the bike closer to a modern luxury car in terms of driver assistance. The Africa Twin takes a more purpose-built approach to technology, prioritizing rider aids that matter off-road, switchable traction control, multiple ride modes tuned for surfaces from tarmac to gravel to sand, and on DCT-equipped models, an off-road specific gear logic that behaves differently than it would on the street. It's technology in service of capability rather than luxury, which fits the bike's overall identity. The Rebel, by contrast, keeps things intentionally simple, generally offering ABS as the primary electronic safety net and little else. A choice that keeps both the price and the learning curve low for the riders it's aimed at. Who should buy which bike? If your riding fantasy involves crossing several states in a single trip, riding 2-up with a partner, and arriving at your destination feeling like you just stepped out of a comfortable chair rather than off a motorcycle, the Goldwing is built specifically for you. It rewards patience and long stretches of pavement, and its price and complexity make the most sense for a rider who will genuinely use its touring capability rather than commute 5 miles to work on it. If you want one bike that can handle a highway commute during the week and a genuine off-road adventure on the weekend without needing a second more specialized machine, the Africa Twin is the obvious choice among these three. It asks a little more of the rider in terms of skill and confidence, particularly off-road, but it rewards that investment with a versatility neither the Goldwing nor the Rebel can match. And if you're new to riding, working with a tighter budget, or simply want a light, honest motorcycle for getting around town without excess weight or complexity, the Rebel remains one of the smartest entry points into the Honda lineup. It won't cross a continent or crawl over boulders, but it will teach you to ride with confidence. And for a huge number of riders, that's precisely what a first motorcycle should do. It's also worth being honest about the skill and confidence each bike demands from its rider. The Goldwing's weight makes it forgiving once moving but genuinely challenging at walking speed for a less experienced rider, particularly in a crowded parking lot or on an uneven driveway, which is part of why Honda built in features like reverse assist and, on some trims, a hill start assist to take pressure off exactly those moments. The Africa Twin asks the most of a rider in a different way, rewarding genuine off-road skill and confidence standing on the pegs, skills that take time and practice to build, even for riders who are already comfortable on pavement. The Rebel asks the least of all three, by design. Its lightweight, low seat, and forgiving power delivery mean a first-time rider can typically feel reasonably confident within the first few rides, which is precisely why so many riding schools and new owners gravitate toward it. None of this makes one bike more legitimate than another. It simply means the right choice depends as much on where you are in your riding journey as on where you eventually want that journey to take you. Resale value and long-term ownership. All three of these motorcycles benefit from something that matters enormously over the long haul: Honda's reputation for building engines that simply keep running with reasonable care. That reputation tends to support stronger resale values across the lineup compared to less durable competitors, though the specifics vary by model. Goldwings tend to hold value well among touring riders specifically, since the used market for a bike this capable and comfortable stays relatively steady even as newer model years arrive. Africa Twins have developed a similarly loyal following, and well-maintained examples with the DCT transmission in particular tend to command strong resale prices given ongoing demand for a proven adventure platform. The Rebel occupies an interesting position here too, since its low upfront cost and reputation as a dependable first bike keep it in consistent demand on the used market, particularly among riders taking their first step into motorcycling who would rather buy a lightly used example than a brand new one. Whichever of the three you choose, keeping up with Honda's recommended service intervals, oil changes, valve checks, and drivetrain maintenance appropriate to each bike's specific mechanicals goes a long way toward protecting both reliability and resale value down the road. What owners commonly say about each bike. Talk to enough long-term Goldwing owners and a few themes come up again and again. Most describe the bike as remarkably reliable for something this mechanically complex, though a handful mention that the sheer number of electronic systems means a specialized Honda touring shop is worth seeking out, rather than a generalist mechanic when something does need attention. The most common complaint isn't about the engine at all. It's about weight at low speed, something that improves with practice but never fully disappears, especially for shorter riders. Africa Twin owners tend to praise the engine's bulletproof reputation and the bike's genuine off-road ability, though some note that the stock seat isn't the most comfortable for multi-hour highway stretches and is a common early upgrade. Riders who bought the standard model rather than the adventure sports sometimes wish they'd sprung for the larger tank once they started planning longer remote routes, a detail worth thinking through before you buy rather than after. Rebel owners overwhelmingly describe the bike as an honest, low-drama first motorcycle, easy to live with and cheap to keep running. The most frequent piece of feedback isn't really a complaint so much as an expectation to set correctly going in, that the smaller displacement options, particularly the Rebel 300, can feel underpowered for sustained highway riding at higher speeds, which is worth knowing if your commute involves a lot of interstate rather than city streets. The bottom line: there's no single correct answer to Gold Wing versus Africa Twin versus Rebel, because these three motorcycles were never designed to compete with each other in the first place. They were designed to serve three entirely different kinds of riders and, honestly, three entirely different visions of what a motorcycle is for. The real question isn't which bike is best, it's which kind of riding you actually see yourself doing a year from now, on a real road, in real weather, with real miles under you. Sit on all three if you possibly can. Spec sheets can tell you displacement and seat height, but they can't tell you how a bike feels underneath you at a stoplight, or how your shoulders feel after 3 hours in the saddle. Whichever one you walk away wanting to ride again tomorrow is almost certainly the right one. If this comparison helped you narrow things down, consider subscribing for more honest, practical looks at the bikes actually worth your money.